Welcome to tonight's program, Geothermal, the only 24/7 renewable. We're very pleased. Well, before I introduce Vikram, for those of you who are not familiar, this is a program sponsored by Northwest Village Network. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, we are a volunteer-driven organization of seniors living in Northwest Philadelphia. Our goal is to help each other stay active and engaged, support each other to remain in our homes as long as possible. We currently have over 150 members who enjoy a range of activities and services. If you have questions about NVN, please go to our website. At this point, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Vikram Rao, who is Executive Director of Research Triangle Energy Consortium, a nonprofit in energy. Dr. Rao was formerly Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Halliburton, and has served as an expert witness in intellectual property litigation. He's currently has written a number of books, and has the most recent one, which I'm sure is way beyond any of us, is Particulate Matter, and that was released in December 2020 by Elsevier Press. And it talks about the formation of airborne particulate matter and its impact on human health, which is really a big issue now with COVID. So we are happy to welcome Dr. Rao to our talk on geothermal.
So thank you, Hope. Known Hope essentially forever, since the early 70s. And so all this happened because apparently some of you folks saw the video that I do with my son called Energy Explained. And I think, well, not I think, I know one of them was on geothermal. And I believe that that was the impetus for some of you asking for this as a topic. And so that's where we are. But here's how I like to run these. Well, first of all, I don't know how the muting is going to work, but if there is a question or a short comment, not long editorials, but short comment during what I'm saying, that's fine. Okay. And the leader of our things will sort out how to unmute you or whatever. Put up the yellow hand, and that's fine, because this is going to be like a town hall meeting. I mean, this is not a lecture. Okay, we're going to chat about stuff. We can even change gears and chat about something else. So, for example, if you want to toss all of this out and say, we've recently seen an editorial by Friedman that says this, how wrong is it? That's fine too. Okay, not editorial, he writes opinions. And so, as I say, we can take segues into any part of energy, because part of this is just to impart understanding. It is not necessarily an ode to geothermal, although I do think I'll come back to why I do think geothermal is an important part of the future. But I'm going to set the stage for you with a non-geothermal point. And that is something that that realization didn't exist with me at the time I signed up to do this one. So that's why it does not appear in the blurb that we sent out. That realization, which I'll tell you what it is in a second, happened because of the book I'm currently writing together with Chris Gould at NC State, is on something called small modular nuclear reactors. And when I was writing that, the editorial board of the press was saying, we really can't be, this can't be all about nuclear. There's antipathy to nuclear. etc. And I said, yeah, I kind of agree with that. And so I looked pretty hard at the overall renewable energy firmament, if you will. And here's what I believe, and it's not a completely conventionally held belief that I'm aware of. Because, for example, and I mentioned Friedman, I don't know if any of you saw his opinion piece in the New York Times today. If you didn't, then find it. And it's interesting. It's not quite what I've written, but here's what the correct parts are. The correct parts include that solar and wind are basically taken over. Okay, they are the new baseload, and so the word baseload is going to be redefined. And so in this context, the baseload will mean that anybody who's got solar and wind is going to make it their primary source of electricity, and everything else has to fit. So why is that? The reason is that it became immensely inexpensive. So in many parts of the world, I mean, all the way from Los Angeles to New Delhi, the levelized cost, we call it, which is the fully loaded cost of solar, is under 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, so that is lower than dirty coal. Forget about clean coal, okay, which adds a lot of, which adds an additional dollars to the thing. But even dirty coal is clean, is cheaper than dirty coal. The same with wind. Where you got it, it can be 2.5 cents or 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And so grids that have both are trying to make them the base of operations. But there's a serious problem with that. And the serious problem, the couple of serious problems. One serious problem with that, the key one, is that some diurnality. That is to say, the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time. There is a German word called Dunkelheit, Dunkelflaute. Which is a combination of Dunkelheit, which is basically when there is no sunlight, and Flaute, which basically is absence of stillness, but absence of wind. So Dunkelheit is periods when you have neither sun nor the wind. And so during the periods of Dunkelheit, you got to do something else. And then you ask, how often does it happen? Well, let me give you an anecdote. Germany has about 40%. Well, this is that 2020 figure. It'll differ by months, but anyway, 40% of their electricity is from renewables. 40%. Okay, so that's interesting. But here's the deal: on a given day, it can be 15% or 70%. So then what gives? What gives is that wind and solar are so variable that you've got to level that load with something. And so what are you going to level it with? For the 4 to 6 hours, the key 4 to 6 hours, the famous 4 to 6 hours, from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. in most places, where there is no solar and wind may or may not be there, is done with batteries. And after that, if you got days or weeks or months of Dunkelheit, which you do, take for example in India during the monsoon season, you got several weeks of that. So then what do you do? So what is happening today is mostly natural gas. 95% of that augmentation is being done with natural gas. So you have this uncomfortable truth, which is the more solar and wind you have, the more natural gas you use, unless something changes, okay? And that something changes is what we're going to talk today, okay? And they're going to basically, so in the book, Chris and I say that we've retitled the book to be enabling renewable energy. I haven't figured it out yet. And then subtitle is the role of small modular nuclear reactors. But it's the key part is enabling renewable energy. And so when solar and wind, on average, solar is no more than 25% of the time. 25%. How the heck do you have a grid based upon something that's only operational 25% of the time? You don't. Okay. Wind can be up to 40%, but it's up and down and sideways, and it can be as low as 20. And so it's the variability. So that is the issue that the renewable energy world faces today. So first of all, I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause there for any questions or comments. Go for it. You're muted.
Hi. So I was thinking a couple of things. One is that the geothermal and nuclear, those are 24/7. And in some sense, that doesn't help that much with diurnal energy. And so, you know, you need something that you can turn on and off. I wondered if there's what is renewable that you can turn on and off. Dams, I guess, are one.
That's a great question, Leonard. And I'd like anybody else in the audience to build on that question. Does anybody else have an opinion to address what Leonard just said? I will address it, but it would be cute if somebody else has
I have a comment. I'm not addressing Leonard's question because I really don't know very much about this, but isn't there a way of storing the energy if we have batteries that can store the energy so that if there's solar that we don't need, we could save it for later and so forth? And I missed I don't understand what Leonard said. Obviously, the two of you do, about geothermal and nuclear energy, why you can't turn it off and on. If you could clarify that, that would be great.
Yep, I'll clarify that. Any other build on this? Somebody else has something to say? I'll address both Barbara's point and Leonard's point. Anybody else has anything to say? You don't have to answer anything, but you could do what Barbara just said, which is, I don't understand this aspect or that aspect.
Does hydrogen fall anywhere in this?
Yes, it does. In fact, it does uniquely. So, all right. So maybe I should launch into answers. You three have raised all the 3 points that I would have raised. All right. So Leonard is correct. In fact, the diurnality is such that it's both diurnal as well as in longer space of time. You will see. So the diurnality means within 24 hours, what goes up and down. Okay. And solar tends to, it goes up and down something, what the Californians call the duck curve, DUC stands for something. And the good news is that wind and solar on a diurnal basis tend to sort of match. When one is high, the other is low. In principle, if you go on any particular grid, they tend to sort of match, which is cool, which is accidental, but it's there. But Leonard's point is this: you got to plug the gaps, okay? Whereas these, in his opinion, both nuclear reactors and geothermal are 24/7. They are, okay? So how do we achieve this? How do we plug the gaps with something that runs all the time? All right. Well, one answer to that question is what Rick lays, which is hydrogen. Okay, so one answer to that question is that you use, so let's pick any of them. Let's pick geothermal. It's kind of running all the time, or it can run all the time. But when it's not needed to plug the gap, what we can do one of two things. We can throttle it back. I'll come back to that in a second. Okay, and we call that load following. Okay, load following means if the load requirement drops, then can you drop without hurting anything? And the answer is yes, for both geothermal and small modular nuclear reactors. Not for huge reactors, but with small modular nuclear reactors, the answer is yes, they're both load following. But then it's a waste, because you've got a piece of capital equipment that is now being amortized over a shorter period of time. Okay, so that's not such a good idea. So get back to Rick's point, which is hydrogen. So one solution to that is that in either case, whether it's a nuclear reactor or geothermal, you plug the solar and wind gaps, and in the times you don't need it, you use the excess electricity, I'm going to call it excess, to electrolyze water. Okay, and Europe is doing it today. They have excess, tend to have excess wind, and they're using it to electrolyze water, and they're producing hydrogen. And then, so what do you do with the hydrogen? Well, the simplest thing to do with the hydrogen is to mix it in a natural gas pipeline. So now, will come a time when the world will get rid of fossil fuels, but we'll have a different solution at that point with the hydrogen. And we can discuss what that is also. But in the interim, what the French are experimenting with is they're putting in 20% hydrogen into the natural gas pipeline. And it turns out that at 20%, everything works, in the sense that the hydrogen doesn't escape. It's a very small molecule, so it leaks out easily. But at 20% level, it's all right. It doesn't embrittle the steel, which is something called hydrogen embrittlement. At 20%, it doesn't happen. And the folks using it can adjust their burners, whatever it is, whether it's in the kitchen, or it's producing electric power, can adjust their burners relatively easily at 20%. And so at this point, the European laws allow only 20%, but that's what we've done. So that's exactly right, Rick. So hydrogen is a play. It's not the only hydrogen play, but that is one aspect in response to Leonard's question, is that you plug the gaps, and what's left over, you make hydrogen with it, and then you do something with the hydrogen. That's the answer. Now, batteries was mentioned. Barbara's mentioned batteries, and batteries are okay. But let me give you a statistical anecdote. The last bid in LA for solar, which was accepted, came in with the following numbers. The solar part came in at little under 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, this is Southern California. They get sun. There is a song, "It Never Rains in Southern California." That's not true, but it's there you are. Okay, that dates me, but I think some of you are right in that age group, so we're good. Yes, Barbara is saying yes. That number for the 4 to 6 hours from 6 to 10 p.m. with batteries adds another 2 cents. It doubles the solar number for just 4 hours of operation. So if you start talking about days and weeks of operation, not what we have today. Okay, what we have tomorrow, here's what we will have. The 3 solutions for this longer term. And longer term, we tend to define that as 10 hours and more. What we have is only 3, in my opinion. Geothermal, SMRs, which is small modular reactors, and advanced innovative storage, electrochemical. Yes, Barbara. Oh, yeah, it's not Barbara, but the other one. Yes, go ahead.
John.
What about piezo?
Piezo, so you could do that. So there, but those are what I call niche applications for. So for example, you could use that for specific devices in specific applications, but we're talking about scale for worldwide. How do you do it worldwide? Piezo would be only a factor, would probably not scale in terms of cost, but where it can be done, yes. And then there are a couple of others which are currently being done. Somebody mentioned hydro. What's called pumped hydro is happening today. So the Danes tend to produce a lot of wind energy, which is in excess. They ship it up, the electricity, up to Norway, and they do something called pumped hydro. So you pump it up the, whatever it is, the mountain, using the excess electricity, and then you let it flow down again when you want it, and then produce electricity. So it's called pumped hydro. Yeah.
So there was a paper in, I think it was in the Scientific American, no, it was in Science, probably 25 years ago. Somebody doing proof of principle where they embedded a piezo mechanism in the heel of a boot.
But some people don't know what piezo is.
Piezo, so it's a pressure, well, you know what it is. So you can explain it better than I can, but it's basically pressure transduced into electricity. So they did proof of principle with hiking boots, showing that they could, at that time, it would power the person's cell phone or something like that. But I mean, you could embed piezo in pavement, in buildings. You know, you're basically using gravity, you're translating gravity into electricity. I would think that would be universal, no?
I have not looked at piezo. So folks, basically what was explained is right. The piezo is a device. It's used quite a bit where it's pressure sensitive device which then converts electricity. They tend to be relatively inefficient on the whole, but for scale, for utility scale, all I can say is I'm not looking into it, but I've never heard of anybody mentioning piezo as what we call a utility scale. See, most of us, when we worry about these things, the first question we ask is, is it scalable? Okay, because we're talking about a heck of a movement in carbon over a relatively short space of time. But you're going to have innovative storage mechanism, that could be one, and innovative electricity production mechanism, that could be, piezo could be in one, that will fill a lot of niches, I call them, and they're good. I mean, it's going to be all of the above is what it's going to come down to. But when you talk about utility scale, when you got a huge utility trying to go give you 24/7 capability, then I think it's one of these three buckets. And the third bucket is sort of a grab bag, which is what I'm just calling innovative storage, unexplained. And there are some outfits that are now trying to do it with compressed air and so forth, but which ones will win, I don't know. But it's an important enough bucket to say it's not just the other two, but the other two are going to be crucial. But in my opinion, geothermal and small modular reactors will be the main gap fillers, but even they will not be fully hit their stride till the 2030s, till the mid 2030s. Again, scale. And so then there's a question of what happens in between. So, and we can get into that unless there is some more digging into what's already been said.
Vikram, I think that some folks are worried they don't understand enough about what geothermal is to be able to relate to the comparisons of how it integrates with these other methods. Are you at a point where you could kind of lay out the basic premise?
Absolutely. So we can go back to what we originally were going to do. But so geothermal there are two types of geothermal energy. One is what's currently being practiced at scale in countries that have got it. And that would be Iceland, that would be parts of California and Nevada, and other places which have the right conditions. So what are the right conditions? Well, first of all, let's start at the beginning. Where is geothermal energy coming from? It's coming from the center of the earth. At the center of the earth, we have essentially our little sun. Okay, it's a nuclear reactor, and it's got temperatures approximating those of the surface of the sun, and it's producing heat. But most folks believe, my co-author of the book believes, that 80% is not coming from that, actually from the heat we are getting, is coming from the decay of radioactive isotopes a little further out in the crust from the middle. The middle is basically molten, okay? But rather than split that hair, there's no question that there's a bunch of heat coming from somewhere in the center of the earth, sourced from a nuclear reaction of some sort, whether it's actual nuclear reactor or whether it is decaying elements, kind of doesn't matter. And so that heat conducts radially through the surface and eventually gets to the surface of the earth and leaves. So that's what happens. What we find is that there can be short circuit paths. What's happening in Iceland, for example, is what we call hydrothermal. It's an aspect of geothermal, but it's unique in the sense that it tends to happen in places with previous volcanic origins and so forth. In fact, in other words, it's not everywhere. It won't be in the Serengeti, okay, for example. So what we have here is water sourced from somewhere down there that comes up in faults and fissures, in basically where the rocks split due to some sort of action, usually earthquake action. And the water comes through these hot areas and comes up hot. And where it comes up naturally, we call them geysers, or we call them hot springs. So Yosemite is a geyser, Old Faithful. And in Iceland, it tends to come up, basically bubble up, okay? And it's collected, and the hot water is then converted into electricity with turbine generators, okay? The steam basically is. And then some sensible heat is used for other things, like every sidewalk in Reykjavik has got pipes running underneath with hot water, and so those sidewalks are always have no snow on them and it's all from the geothermal energy. So, but this is a niche play, I call it. In fact, when I was Chief Technology Officer at Halliburton, I would not allow my people to do research in the hydrothermal space. We served them. We provide services for the hydrothermal folks. But I said, don't do research. Why? Because not scalable. Okay, those conditions exist where they do. There's a water source down there. There are fissures of the appropriate sort, which we then go and intersect with wells. Finding those intersection points is dicey. The percentage of that finding is under 20%, and so forth and so on. So it's hit and miss. So I did not consider hydrothermal to be scalable, and so we didn't work on hydrothermal. What I call true geothermal is different. The true geothermal is still the same source, is still the same hot rock, but it does not rely on a water source downstairs. What you do is you pump water down. So you drill a well, let's say you got 2 wells, usually there'll be 3. One produced, it doesn't matter. You drill a well and inject the water into the formation, it gets hot, and then you cause it to move to a companion well where you remove it and produce it. And then you drive your turbines, and the less hot water now is recycled. And so this is the This is what one aspect of geothermal is. And that aspect has a name. It's called enhanced geothermal systems. It doesn't matter. The point is that it's one class of the new geothermal, is where you drill a well, pump water down, it gets hot by going through the formation, comes up in a companion well, and then you repeat that. Okay, that is that's one whole class. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I always do this in the beginning and I forgot. I advise 2 geothermal startups right now. So the disclaimer here is that any fondness for geothermal has to be discounted if you want to discount it, okay? Because I do advise 2 startups, all right? So there we are. The other approach is called closed loop. And a closed loop system is where you drill a well, you put a pipe down the well, and somehow you contort it to come back up again. And there's ways to do that. None of them fun for the people doing it. And then what you have is a circulating system, like a radiator in your car radiator. You just pour a fluid in, could be water, usually water, doesn't have to be water. It gets hot, and then it never enters the rock. Okay, that's the key. And so it avoids some of the problems with the enhanced geothermal systems. And we can get into, so I'll stop here, and you can ask me questions on either of those. And if you have nothing to ask, then I can go on to give you the pluses and minuses of those. But those are the principal workhorses, I would say.
We have one question from the group, and then I have one too. Someone is asking about individual home systems. I guess there are individual, there are sort of neighborhood or community systems, and then there are municipal systems. And my question for you is, I'm not sure I caught what switched your mind from Halliburton not letting your folks, can you guys mute yourselves? I think you're unmuted. Yeah, thank you. I think you're still on the screen. Faye and Dan, you're still on the screen. Are you?
They're not on my screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I muted ourselves, but I guess I have a couple of questions if I can ask them.
Oh, okay.
One is, for this geothermal, how deep do you drill? And then second and third question that kind of tie into it. I know one of our sons was looking into using geothermal energy to heat his house, and for various reasons did not use it. When you're tapping the geothermal energy, are you simply using it for its heat source, or are you converting it into some other form of energy, such as electricity, and if so, how?
Okay, so there are quite a couple of questions from both of you. So let me talk about the home system first. So we have one, okay? So it's about 3,000 feet of pipe. It was drilled, and it is a closed loop, okay? So it's a pipe that goes around 10 to 12 feet below the surface. Around 10 to 12 feet, you start equilibrating. At about 20 feet, you're really good shape, which is to say that around 20 feet below, which is why cellars are wonderful. True cellars stay cool all the time, all right? Because around 10 feet or so, it's almost a constant temperature. So what you have is you're circulating your fluid, usually water with some ethylene glycol in it, that picks up the heat and brings it back, and you run it through a heat pump, all right? So that is what a home system would be. In my opinion, any new development should have one. Why a new development? Because what we did it out of love. The return on investment is not good because there was nothing there, and we had the well drilled, and it's tricky and it's not cheap, all right? Because it went under the house and under the property, came back, blah, blah. When you have a new development, you can trench it very inexpensively. You're going to be trenching all kinds of stuff anyway. Any new development should have underground power lines anyway. And it'll have sewer, it'll have this, and it'll have that. There'll be trenches everywhere. And so if you do it from the beginning, it's dreadfully cheap. And everybody should do it, and should do it on a community basis if possible. So then you, similar to solar, I think that little solar farms should be on a community basis and not on every rooftop, okay? A solar panel on the ground is at least 75, well, the solar panel on the roof is at least 1.75 times one on the ground on cost to install. Forget about getting cleaned. We can talk for some time about if you don't clean your solar panels, how much efficiency loss there is. It's pretty high, and it depends on where you are as to how much it is, and on it goes. So on the ground ones also can follow the sun. The rooftop ones cannot. You can't put those trapping motors up there. And so for all those reasons, communities, bloody hell, community gardens exist. So why not a community solar farm or a community geothermal? So yeah, so if the geothermal is done from the beginning, it's a very easy type of geothermal. It's not utility scale and all that good stuff, but so what, okay? But so yeah, it can very much be done, but do it from the beginning. I think, did you have was there another point raised? I may have lost it. Oh yes, the depth, yeah. Okay, so the enhanced geothermal systems, the ones where the fluid enters the rock and is recovered and brought back up, are more thermally efficient. Why? Because the fluid, let's call it water in most cases, the water is contacting the hot rock, and the conductivity is extremely high when you do that. The closed loop system, you're relying upon the thermal conductivity of the rock to bring the heat from 10 feet away from the pipe to the pipe, okay? And then you do have, then the question of thermal conductivity of the pipe, but that has been improved, okay? So, but no matter how much you improve it, the closed loop systems require higher temperatures. So typical closed loop systems will require a rock temperature of at least 280 C, but preferably over 300, close to 350 C. Enhanced geothermal systems will require only starting from 175 C to about 220 C. So to give you a picture, enhanced geothermal, 175 to 220, closed loop, let's say 300 to 350. So right away, you know that the closed loop is deeper in the rock, because all over the world, we've got something called geothermal gradients, okay? And geothermal gradient is basically with depth, how much does temperature increase? That's called the geothermal gradient. And that is variable everywhere in the world. So whereas I would say that both enhanced geothermal and closed loop can be done anywhere in the world, it goes to your question, Dan, is some places it may be too deep to be cost effective, okay? So it depends on the geothermal gradient. So the enhanced geothermal systems are better from a depth standpoint. The ones that I am familiar with tend to have a depth of between about 8 to 9,000 feet. Okay, it can be as low as 5,000 feet if you got the right geothermal gradient, whereas the closed loop systems will be deeper. And the rock in these cases is not as easy to drill as the so-called sedimentary rock in oil and gas. Because the rock in this case is often, and there are exceptions, is what's called igneous rock that was formed through volcanic action. So they tend to be rocks that we commonly know as basalt and granite and so forth. And you know how hard granite is drilled through, etc. So, so without going into too much of all that stuff, somewhere between 5 and 15,000 feet is the answer to your question. And the lower number is the enhanced geothermal, and the higher number is the closed loop. Did I address everything that was asked? Or
Yes, I think that's good. Thank you.
I have
I
another
have a question.
Can I-
And it may have been part of what Dan asked. Okay, you're bringing up hot liquid. So I could use that to heat my house if I somehow could hook it in, perhaps. I thought the goal is to convert it to energy that can be used not just to heat, but to cool my house, to, just part of my electrical system that I can use my TV and my computer and whatever other toys I have. How do you go from bringing this heat up and converting it to electricity, to other usable energy?
yeah, so that is a good question. I
thought that's the goal of using this. It's a source of energy, just like nuclear energy and.
Absolutely. And so the answer to that is that the fluid you bring up is hot. Let's say water. It comes up as superheated steam, and you run it through a generator, a steam generator. That's what
it captures the energy.
Yeah, the steam generator it produces electricity. The generator generates electricity with steam being the motive power. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like this really should be done at a municipality level to be cost effective rather than unless we each live in mansions that are separated.
Yes. For homes, forget all that. For homes, it's only a heat pump. Okay, but heat pump goes both directions. Okay, it cools as well as heat. So, but yeah, no. For homes, you can only use what we call the sensible heat. You cannot. No, there's no power generation.
So for homes, it would be a heat pump, so it could either heat or cool your house.
Yeah, because see that 10 feet down is probably a constant 57 degrees. In winter, that's hot. Okay, in summer it's cool.
Okay, but in terms of making a difference, becoming fossil fuel independent, it would be used to generate electricity.
Well, it differs the use of electricity. If you use the heat pump to cool or heat your house, then you do not use electricity to do the same thing. So it's a yeah. No, it's a displacement of use of electricity. Yeah, you can't. Solar produces electricity in the home itself, but geothermal does not. It just produces heat. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a question. When I hear about drilling into the earth, it makes me wonder what we're actually, what are the repercussions of this? Are we doing something again that will totally find has disturbed our earth in some way or another?
Yep. And that is the principal issue with the enhanced geothermal systems, which are not faced as much by the closed loop systems. In the enhanced geothermal systems, yes, you actually hydraulically fracturing the rock to move the fluid through the rock to the other well. Now, they take advantage of something called natural fractures. So they don't do, the amount of energy needed to that for the fracturing is not as high as it is for oil and gas. But one of the huge issues has been what's called induced seismicity, okay? The possibility of earthquakes being produced by hydraulic fracturing. Every geothermal system that I know of will have seismic monitors. And it's not hard to do, partly because it's a very more sophisticated operation in some ways than oil and gas. And you know exactly where the rock is, and you know what it will take to break that rock and the energy required. So most, really the proper ones will have stations that will be watching for seismicity. The trick then is, how do you use that? And how you use it is that if you hear the seismicity, so to speak, it's actually a sound wave, then you back off on the pressure of the injected water. By the way, the same problem is, yes, I'll answer that question, Joan. The same problem is there when you try to inject CO2 into earth formations to store it. If you're not careful, you'll induce seismicity because CO2 is also a fluid, usually a supercritical fluid. And so in all those cases, watch for the seismicity and then back off on the pressure and deal with the back off on the pressure. But yes, that is an issue. That issue is not there for closed loop. Yeah, go ahead.
So as a follow-up to that, so what about retrofitting the fracking holes for hydrothermal? That's a win-win.
Yes, so that is happening too, not necessarily fracking wells, any wells that are being repurposed. But to the question that popped up on chat is, so is geothermal require fracking? The answer is yes, for the one of them, the enhanced geothermal system, the one that is shallower. But as I said, they're done with higher level of sophistication and they use less energy to open the fracture. It's a little detailed, but basically the energy to open an existing fracture is a fraction of the energy to open a new one. Okay, all fracturing is you start a fracture and then you propagate it. If the fracture already exists, nothing to start. The start part is the most energetic. All geothermal systems that I'm aware of, at least the ones I advise, operate in areas with natural fractures existing. So by and large, you don't have to start one. So your energy usage should be low. And in the tests that they've run, that has proven to be the case. So yes, there is a risk, but in my fairly informed opinion, the risk is not high. If you do it right, which is that you monitor it. But that is one of the reasons why geothermal has pushback from some communities, is exactly that. It's the same pushback as fracking, which closed loop will not have. But closed loop has other issues. You have to drill much further. Yes, no, I'm looking at the chat. Geothermal ships, yes, okay, all right. So closed loop has other issues, but there is one outfit that I advise that has a unique closed loop that gets around some things, but we won't go there. Okay, so we are only got about 15 minutes, I'm told. So the question that popped up is, where is geothermal cheapest? The cheapest is going to be in California, Nevada, where the thermal gradients are high. This is the areas where natural geothermal had happened, but where natural geothermal petered out, okay? Petered out to the point where the water sources were not that prolific and they were not able to keep up with the generation capacity that was built. So they have installed generation capacity that can be used, and the rock is hot. So you can do it at much shallower depths. So California, Nevada, anywhere that there had been volcanic action at some time in life, it will be where the cheapest energy will be. Even though, in principle, this can be anywhere in the world, the geothermal gradients are higher in those places. So I answered that question. I think no other one popped up. Yeah. Field is open. We have 10 more minutes. What? You run out Okay, so let me tell you
Okay,
numbers.
I'll ask another question out of my naivete. Do you think that large communities, that it would be cost effective to generate electricity or just for heating and cooling? And say communities of 200,000 people.
Okay, for communities of 200,000 people, you wouldn't do the home variety geothermal that I got. You would do.
Right.
Okay, right. Okay, yes. So geothermal is highly modular in the sense that, yeah, I'll come back to that question. Some questions are popping up. It's modular. So for example, one well triplet, I'll call it, one injector wells and two producer wells, will generate about 5 to 10 megawatts. That would serve a good sized community. And that's just one well. And so you could have that on a location, central location, and you could serve a community. Absolutely. And then you would produce electricity, not just heat.
Because it would be quite expensive to start all this infrastructure that's needed home for home. Sounds to me that it would be quite expensive, even if it was done in a new community.
Well, actually, if a development from the beginning, trenching it is not going to be that expensive.
Yeah, but that's not any price problem.
But to your point, which is if you want your community to have electricity, then the way to go would be to have your own geothermal or your own small modular reactor for your community. And so let me give you numbers. The numbers for the geothermal today, and I think this is public. I have sometimes remember what is secret and what's not. This is public, is about 6 to 7 cents a kilowatt hour, which is bloody good. Okay. I mean, it's not the 3 cents as solar, but it's more than the 6, 7 cents of solar plus batteries. Okay. So it's, so a community could afford to build one fully loaded for 5 to 10 megawatt capability. And
6 cents a kilowatt hour include the cost of building it?
Everything. It's called what's called LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. Look for that. When people talk about numbers, ask for levelized cost of electricity, which is that over a full year, what is the average cost? Yeah, everything included. Yes. The same thing. I mean, Mr. Nakamura asked question whether you could do the same thing with an SMR. The answer is yes. So the SMR, small modular reactors, they range all over the place. But you could have one which is 10 megawatts, or up to 30 easily. But then you got a different problem. We don't want nuclear in my backyard problem. Look, let me tell you something. There's no form of energy without a downside. Okay, there's no form of energy that people don't want something. People don't want wind in North Carolina. We have something called the ridge law. You cannot put windmills on the ridges. Okay, don't even ask. Okay, and people don't object to windmills out in the ocean because they look unsightly. I think those are birds myself, but that's what it is. So people are not going to like stuff about energy. That's the way it goes. But yes, an SMR or a small geothermal could be purpose-built for a community. They are being purpose-built today for what we call data centers by people like Google and so forth, who they are data hogs, the data centers, and they want it renewable, and solar and wind not going to get them there because not 24/7.
Can I ask a question? Quick question. I'd read an article a few years ago about a project somewhere in Boston where they got strong union support and environmental support to retrofit a neighborhood for geothermal using the natural gas pipe infrastructure, and they were excited that possibly this is the way of the future because there's already some, the infrastructure is somewhat there. do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I don't have a thought on that particular one, but I think that geothermal can very safely be introduced, despite what we discussed about seismic, potential seismic activity. The level of sophistication high enough that a community could employ it. I don't understand the natural gas pipeline bit, unless what they were saying is that during the periods they don't need it, they'll make hydrogen and put it on the pipeline. But otherwise, I'm not clear on the connection between the natural gas pipeline and the geothermal energy. I'd have to see the if you'd send me the the article and send me your email address, I will respond to you.
Yeah, I'll try to find it. Thank you.
So we subsidize the oil and gas industry. So I'll circle back to my question about retrofitting the fracked holes with piping. So it basically would stabilize the fracked holes, which are potentially seismically active, and at the same time provide a potential infrastructure for the kind of hydrothermal energy you're talking about.
Yeah, so actually the fracked holes are not seismically active there. The seismic activity is during the fracturing process. So once you're finished, they're no longer are. But your point is taken on a different level. I believe that oil companies should grab and run with geothermal as their alternative, because it's exactly the same activity. Okay, the same folks will eventually get laid off when we stop using oil and gas, can be employed to run the geothermals. So it's a perfect fit. And I've written about that. Yeah. And you can use existing wells. Absolutely you can. And happening. In fact, the folks I advise, the first well they did was an existing well. So you're dead right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, it's ironic because we've been exploiting the carcasses of dead dinosaurs. Now we can go back and explain, can sort of come for full circle again. Yeah.
So how are we doing on time? I'm under your thumb here. Your control.
Yes, I think that we should wind it up. And if there are any last questions, you have one more question in the chat about the waste from the small scale nuclear. And then maybe one or two more questions and we should wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So any nuclear has three issues. What do you do with the waste? What's called nuclear proliferation, and the possibility of accidents. Okay. Let me address all three. Let me start with accidents. All SMRs, I'm going to call them SMRs, small modular reactors. All SMRs are designed to be what's called intrinsically safe. Okay, what happened in Fukushima Daiichi, what happened in 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl were all due to the fact that external actions to stop the reaction did not work. Okay, all of these guys have got what's called passive cooling, and if starts run away, they simply cool down. So that safety part is fine. The nuclear proliferation part comes from the fact that if you produce, well, it's a part and parcel of the disposal problem, that the spent fuel can have plutonium in it. And so the reason that the US does not allow, they stopped not unallowing, but still going on, does not allow reprocessing of spent fuel is because of fear that miscreants would steal it and make plutonium with it. France produces 80% of its electricity or somewhere around there from nuclear, and it hasn't happened yet. And I can assure you France is full of miscreants, okay, from somewhere or other, like any other country. So, so these things are fears that can be controlled in some other way. Now, the actual disposal of waste is an issue. And the good news on small modular reactors is they've all been designed to where many of them, the fuel rods are not replaced for anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So the number of times you move things around is much less. And then some of them have clever ways of reprocessing. I believe we should go back to reprocessing. I don't think it's risky. And the fact that you handle it fewer times with an SMR reduces the number of times that you could be mishandled. So it's still an issue. It's a longer point. It's an almost entire chapter in the book. No, it is a chapter in the book. And so it's not a short answer, but I can say this. It's the better answer for SMRs than it is for big nuclear reactors. Yes, the answer is yes. If you fully exploit geothermal, is there still a role for solar or wind? Absolutely, and here's why. Cheap, 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 cheap. Okay, they are so cheap that they're the big dog now. Everything else fits into them. So they're not going away. They will continue to proliferate, but things like this will fill the gaps. No, nuclear or geothermal is not going to push out solar wind. Not, and should not. See, the other interesting thing about all of these is they can all be small footprint, including solar and wind. So they can be what we call distributed energy. So when you've got villages in India, you don't really need a grid to go to them. You can have your own solar and wind, provided you have storage. So on it goes. Renewables offer a unique opportunity to do things differently. And that doesn't mean put them all in a huge operation and put grids out. A lot of it should be distributed.
Okay, Vikram, I think we have one last question from Leonard, and it's in the chat. Could you say more about why small reactors can't run away?
Okay, because their mechanism is such that it cools down when the runaway reaction, which produces heat, happens. Some of that cooling would be from gravity flow of the coolant. One interesting one, I tell you what, I can't do it. I could send you that chapter, which is finished, but it's just the way it's designed. It is intrinsically safe, so you don't have to put fuel rod. You don't have to put control rods in to stop it. One of the really interesting ones is where the chemistry itself. This is, trust me until you read that chapter. And that chapter was not written by me. It was written by a card-carrying nuclear physicist. So you can trust it.
Put your email in the chat so that if people have questions or want further references, they can reach you.
Sure. Gone.
Colleen, any last questions from anyone?
By the way, Hope, you said my latest book was Particulates Matter. You're behind the times. Actually, you're getting your copy in the mail any day now. I just wrote my personal book. It's a book of vignettes. It's got nothing to do with technology. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. There's some bits and pieces, but so there you are.
I think that was part of the literature that we were given for the publicity, the book on particulates.
Yeah. No, nobody should buy it. It's too expensive. I'll never write for Elsevier Press again.
Yeah, they are
They're too
pricey.
expensive.
All right, last chance for anybody? No? Thank you very much, Vikram. I think that we all had many questions. I hope that most of them got answered. And if not, people will be in touch with you. So thank you again. And for those who are going to NVN programs, our next one actually is on Monday, and it's the interview with Steve Stroyman.